So human-centered, or human-decentered design, to get the title correct. So before I do any of my talks, before I begin my material, what I always like to do is take a moment to acknowledge the writers who influenced my thinking, and also the artist-researchers who inspire my vision. And I do this for three reasons. First of all, to ground myself. Second, to remind us all that we build on the work of each other. And third, to contradict and push back against that prevailing narrative that we're all products of individual brilliance and lone genius, particularly in the technology and creative industries. So, in the spirit of Wakisa, the artwork you see here, this is a piece by the artist Alison Janae Hamilton. In 2019, her artwork was projected in Times Square in New York, and this was a video of a river in northern Florida. And this is really to show the connection between the enslaved who labored to build canals to export transported cotton. And it's a way of reminding us that our technological and geological memories have a past. And I want to use this talk as a way of connecting that with us all. So I have 3 points in my talk. First of all, I want to talk about soil, how we should look down, change our relation to the earth, and be reminded of our material and mineral impact on the earth. Secondly, I want to look at ourselves, how we should look inwards and consider who gets to be called a designer and think of the cultural exclusion that's happened there. Third, I want to look at the sky and think about how we can imagine and strive towards pluralistic futures and how we can adopt new perspectives in striving to reach there. Soil. From Mars to Venus is a research project by Dr. Ignacio Acosta, and in this film, presented in dual aspect, you see 2 images or 2 video streams. To the left is Kiruna in Sweden's far north, 200 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle, where iron mining disrupts the well-being of the Sami people, their reindeers, and the life traditions that they have there. To the right, you see the Atacama Desert in Chile, one of the driest places on Earth. But it's a place where mineral extraction is still being conducted, but here it's lithium and copper that's being sought. Now, we may not work with drills and shovels and other heavy machinery, but I want us to start thinking about human-centered economies and how our work, how our labor has an impact on the Earth, and actually how we can see these legacies have a lasting and devastating result. We live in the age of the Anthropocene, and this is a word that academics love to talk about, the age of man and all of the technologies that we have wrought on this earth. And I want us to start thinking about how centuries of human activity has made this impact. And actually, we're talking about the green revolution and moving to electric, but actually we're replacing one form of extraction with another, whether it's petroleum going to lithium. It's still the same type of logic that drives all of that. And if we're going to lithium and electrical sort of motorization, the extraction of lithium is still not going to solve the problems that we face. So the business of technology, it does many things. It isolates. So you look at the magic of our smart systems. You look at the magic of the way AI and all these other technologies work. But it isolates. We're far removed from the people who make this magic work, the labor that's far, far from us. It centralizes, it gathers data in one place. We need to have bigger and bigger databases. We need to have greater energy to make those systems work, and we need to have faster processes to crunch through that data, which again generates more data, and the cycle continues. But we've been here before, because in the age of colonial expansion, we've seen how in a natural world, how forests were flattened to make way for single crash crops. We've seen how biological diversity was eliminated to make efficient use of the land and territory. Control of plantations was centralized to maximize profit. So before imagining brighter futures, I think we must contend with the soil from which the Anthropocene emerges, and I want us to start thinking about what that means, because in our current age, particularly myself, I center myself both as black subject and black object. It's something that I need to do to understand where I stand in this sort of universal technological future we're being presented with. So in the words of Emma Josephine Budge, these things are really important for me to think of, this relationship between black subjectivity and the more than human futures that we're being presented with. Because it's fraught with colonial violence, increasingly harsh climates, and haunting dispossession of lands, lives, and lifeways. So when you think of soil, what I want us to take away from this is we should be looking down to think of the geological and racial traumas of the past. We should be critical of the erasure that has been enacted, and particularly when we're thinking of universal technological utopias, these things are very much connected. So how can we make this real or practical? So let's put it in this way. We can say to rewild the soil, I will rewild this by telling origin stories of the technologies that I work with, from the furthest ends of the earth right into the palm of my hand. Self. So this is where we want to turn our lens and our attention and look inwards and think who gets to be called a designer. Now maybe you work in an office a bit like this, with nice furniture and surroundings, and we've got a very clear idea in our heads about who gets to be called a designer, where they do their work, and what kind of activities that they perform. When I look into the history of European modernism, many of these ideals were founded on eliminating the ornament, and we don't have time to go into it today, but theorists such as Adolf Loos had very specific racially exclusionary or racist exclusionary ideas about what that meant. The elimination of the ornament was really to enable colonial expressions of technological sophistication expressed in cultural artifacts, believing that these artifacts were being used to improve primitive or Afro-descendant peoples. So the buildings we see, the furniture, the technologies, the screens, these have all been imbibed into our surroundings. So through modernism, white European culture is visually codified, reproduced, and disseminated. And it's really important we have this critical view of where these ideas emerge. So to decenter the human, it really means that we should start to be critical of this. So let me give an example. Afro hair braiding. So if you look back to these histories, European modernism really had very clear colonial ideas about how African societies failed to use and understand how to use technologies. But actually, centuries-old designs preserved orally have been transmitted through time, geographically, very complex algorithmic designs in a way that far exceeds the ability of written cultures to preserve data and their integrities. So who gets to be recognized as a designer, and where does design take place? I like to think about the small and the bigs, and you think of the microscopic. A book like Aeropolis by Dr. Neria Cavillo, she talks about being able to decenter the human, to look down to the microscopic, and it's a fascinating book to engage with because we think very expansively, but it's also important to think of the tiniest elements of our planet as well. Thinking of also the ideas of who we recognize as people, who we recognize as persons. In 2021, the Court for Intergenerational Climate Crimes met as a way of performing this idea of, okay, we've made some species extinct. We need to sort of critically examine our role, humans' role in doing that. And in this court, they discussed how these animals were made and other species were made extinct. And asked questions about who gets to be recognized as human or who gets recognized as person. Because when we extend personhood to non-human entities, we express our more than human values. So Let's Become Fungal. This is a really interesting book because it talks about so many, this is a whole seminar, symposium in and of itself. Non-binary, unclarity, instability, all of these ideas is so important to engage with this particular work. So when I talk about self, we need to look inwards. We need to recognize that designers and the entities we assign personhood to express our culturally situated more than human values. So I will rewild myself by interrogating the origin of my design ideals and rethink who I call a designer. Sky. So this is where we look up, think to the future. And when I say the future, I love this piece of artwork by Alicia B. Wilmsley. there are black people in the future, and this multi-site, multi-continent piece of artwork projecting itself is a call to action, it's a rebuke, and it's also a reminder for us to challenge the universal sort of Western culturally situated ideas that we find in our technologies. It's a reminder that we should be working reparatively. So we should be thinking of how we engage with knowledge traditions different to our own. It should also remind us that we should be trying to consider the politics of citation and knowledge making, particularly when we present written text or written knowledge as the only form or source of knowledge as well. Now I'm an avid bird watcher, and I was joining the bird watching group this morning. And back in London, I'm also a member of a bird watching group called Flock Together. We go out once every month to different parts of London. It started as a group to sort of encourage people of colour and ethnic minority communities to engage more with nature. But our work is going in lots of different directions now, with lots of really amazing creative projects. And one of those bird walks we went on earlier this year was to this place in southeast London, Kent, called Footscray Meadows. Now, what's this got to do with this talk? Well, I love this because this scene you see here was where a stately home used to be, and it's now demolished. It caught fire in the early 20th century. It's no longer there. But when you go there, it kind of reminds us, as Julia was saying, how nature rewilds itself, because those two sort of blobs you see there, I think it's those two ornamental trees there. Although the building has disappeared, the clearing remains, and in the foundations you can see traces of the walls growing where the daisies are. It just reminds us that the foundations of human domination are shallow, and nature can always rewild itself, to borrow Julia's term. So I want us to take a moment and think about how we engage with other knowledge traditions other than our own. As you can see, my interests zigzag across many disciplines and subjects matters. That's why I've always been finding it difficult to speak at conferences, which is why I think I belong so much here at V Conference. So this is a book on AI and feminism and technology. It's a really good anthology called The Good Robot. They also produce a podcast if you're interested in that sort of thing. But in one of the chapters in this anthology, Jason Edward Lewis, who runs the Indigenous Futures Institute, also the Initiative for Indigenous Futures, talks about this really important thing of thinking of the Western intellectual context and how we should look to other knowledge traditions to widen our conceptual boundaries. So we think about the sky, we need to look up. Remember, there are black people in the future, reminding us we must never repeat the epistemic erasure, dispossession of indigenous and black peoples. So to make that practical for us all, you can say to yourself, well, I will rewild my perspective by striving towards pluralistic futures in dialogue with knowledge traditions different from my own. Coda. So if ever you visit London, one of the most popular places to go to in London is Westminster. You can see the Houses of Parliament, Big Ben and Westminster Abbey and all of these other fantastic places. So I've got a tip for you. If you go there for any London Underground tube nodes, go in via exit 4. That's the one that's on Bridge Street. And for everyone else who means nothing to you, that's the one that's next to Big Ben. So if you go into that exit, you go down some stairs, look up and you'll see the London Underground sign. But it's different from most of the standard ones, the red and the blue. So this familiar underground sign, since 2022, has been turned into almost like a miniature gallery. It's a rare example of British cultural expression a rare example of black cultural expression in the British public realm. So we've been talking and thinking about rewilding our technological landscapes and rewilding our actual literal landscapes, but this symbol reminds me, these Pan-African colours, of a centuries-old entanglement between Britain, Africa and the Caribbean. Red for its blood and yellow for its gold, green for its fertile lands. The symbols speak of the Ghanaian heritage of its artist, Larry Achiampong. And every time I enter this station, I'm reminded that I can dare to dream of technological futures. Futures in which I have a right to participate in their formation, and futures in which you have a right to participate in their formation. Futures in which we all have a right to participate in their formation. Thank you.